In the village of Abulumo, where the red earth met the sky with dust and prayer, every year ended not with fireworks or feasts, but with drums. Not just any drums. The night of the sacred drum was the one night when the living danced alongside the dead. It was not a festival for the tourists, nor a spectacle for the curious. It was a sacred ritual. A bridge between the earthly and the eternal, when the ancestors could return, if they chose to, through the rhythm of the Ayin, the master drummers, and the trembling bodies of the chosen dancers. For centuries, the elders of Abulumo had guarded this ceremony, as had their fathers and their fathers' fathers. They knew the danger of letting outsiders watch, and the disaster that could follow if the ritual was performed carelessly. Because on that night, when the final drumbeat reached its crescendo, the veil between the two worlds grew thin. Some years, nothing happened. Other years, a message came, a name whispered, a future foretold, or a warning of war, famine, or death. But no one in living memory had seen what was about to happen this year. No one knew that a young dancer, Abani, barely 17, would be possessed before the entire village, her voice not her own. Her eyes burning with a fire older than time. And no one imagined that through her, a dark family secret, buried for 3 generations, would be dragged screaming into the firelight. The sun was sinking behind the baobab trees, casting long, golden shadows across the red soil of Abulumo. Smoke curled up from the cooking fires. And a hush began to settle over the village like a soft blanket. The air was heavy, not with heat, but with expectation. Everyone knew what night it was. The elders had spoken it with reverence. The drummers had fasted and kept silent for 3 days. The dancers had slept in the shrine, their bodies smeared with sacred ash and oil. Even the children, who usually raced around the compound like wild goats, stood quietly near their mothers, their wide eyes reflecting the flicker of the growing fire in the center of the village. Abani sat alone near the edge of the circle, her feet bare, her eyes fixed on the pit where the fire had just been lit. Her heart was pounding, not from fear exactly, but from something deeper, something ancient, like a pull she couldn't explain. She had danced before, but this would be her first time dancing in the sacred drum night. Her older sister Adesua had been chosen once, 5 years ago, but she had collapsed before the final drum and never spoken about the experience. Abani remembered her sister's haunted eyes afterward. And how she had refused to ever dance again. The priestess, Mama Aina, had chosen Abani this year without explanation. "You carry a light in you," the old woman had said. "But where there is light, there is also shadow." Abani didn't know what that meant, but the words clung to her like morning dew on a yam leaf. She looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. Around her, the other dancers were preparing, painting their faces with white clay, tying bells to their ankles, whispering quiet prayers. But Abani remained still. She felt something was waiting for her. Watching. As darkness fell completely, the drummers appeared, each of them emerging from the sacred forest, walking barefoot and in silence, holding their talking drums like newborns. The leader, Baba Oyai, stepped forward and placed his drum down at the fire's edge. He was nearly 80, with skin like cracked bark and eyes that seemed to see through flesh. He did not speak. He did not need to. Everyone knew that once his hand touched the drum, the world would change. And it did. The first beat landed like thunder against the ground. It was not loud in volume. But it had weight. It moved through the earth, through the fire, through the soles of their feet and the bones in their legs. Then came the second beat, and the third. Slowly. The rhythm formed, a pulse older than speech, a pattern that had echoed through generations. The dancers moved into the circle. One by one, they began their motion, feet stamping, arms rising. Bodies bending to the rhythm that was not their own. It was not a dance of performance but of surrender. The drum led, they followed. The fire burned higher. Sparks spiraled into the black sky like souls escaping. When it was Ebony's turn to enter the circle, the air around her seemed to shift. It thickened, like walking into water. Her vision narrowed. She could hear the drum clearly, each beat like a footstep in her mind. She moved, slowly at first, unsure. But as the rhythm grew stronger, her body responded. As if the spirit that lived in her blood had been awakened. She danced. And the village watched in awe. She was no longer Ebony, the shy girl who spoke softly and collected beads by the river. She had become something else. Her movements were fluid, primal, and strange. The way her arms curled, the way her hips turned, the way her neck twisted, it was not of this time. Baba Oyai's drumming grew more intense, as if he, too, felt something stirring. Then, it happened. As the fire flared high, Ebony suddenly froze mid-dance. Her head snapped back, her arms shot wide. And a sound tore from her throat, a sound not human, not natural. It was part scream, part chant, part roar. The drummers stopped. Silence fell like a hammer. Every eye turned toward her. Her body convulsed once, then twice, and then straightened like a rod. She stood unnaturally still. Her eyes had changed. Where once there was brown, now there was something deeper, shadowed. Lit from within, glowing faintly like coals. She spoke. But it was not her voice. "You have called," the voice said, deep and ancient and cracked with time. "And I have come." No one moved. Even the elders were stunned. Possession during the sacred drum night was rare, but this was different. This was not the trembling or shaking of a spirit brushing through. This was full control. Full arrival. Full presence. The spirit raised Ebony's hand and pointed toward the crowd. "There is a lie buried here," it said. "A secret hidden in blood. The dead remember. And we demand truth." A gasp rippled through the people. From the back of the circle, Mama Aina stepped forward, her face pale under her ceremonial markings. She bowed her head low. "What do you seek, spirit?" she asked softly. The possessed girl's head turned slowly to her. "The one who walks with stolen name. The child of betrayal. Bring her forward." Ebony's hand pointed again, this time toward an elderly woman standing near the back. Her name was Iolo Temi, one of the most respected matriarchs in the village, known for her wisdom and long lineage of leadership. All eyes turned to her. Her face went rigid. The spirit spoke again. "The blood of your sister cries out from the soil. You took what was not yours. And the curse has festered. The drum reveals it now." The fire cracked loud. Somewhere, a baby began to cry. Iolo Temi fell to her knees. "No," she whispered. "Please, not tonight." But the drums had already begun again. This time slow and relentless, like the ticking of fate. Ebony stood motionless, her face still not her own, as the night deepened, and the past began to rise. The air around the fire turned heavy. Dense with a silence so deep that it pressed against the skin. Even the insects of the night had gone still, as if the forest itself held its breath. The villagers stood frozen. Their eyes darting between Ebony's rigid form, her body still caught in the grip of something ancient, and Iolo Temi, who now knelt with trembling hands. Her once proud back bowed under the weight of revelation. "I did what I had to do," she murmured, barely audible. But the spirit within Ebony was not moved by whispers. Her voice boomed once more. No longer Ebony's, not even female, but something in between, fluid, resonant, sharp as stone. "The soil remembers the blood," it said. "The ancestors do not sleep while lies stain the name they built. Speak, Temi. Speak it now, before the drums summon more than truth. Speak, or be consumed." Temi looked around. As if seeking someone to defend her. But no one moved. Even her daughters and grandson stood apart, their faces confused and afraid. She was alone now, alone before her ancestors, before the fire. Before the possessed child who had become a mouth for the dead. I was young, Temi said finally, her voice hollow. My sister, Aramide, was the firstborn. The land was to be hers. The house. The family staff. Everything. But she loved a man the elders forbade. A hunter from the enemy tribe. She wanted to run away with him. She came to me, begging me to cover her escape. Temi swallowed hard. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the air. I told her I would help, she continued. But I didn't. I told the elders. I told our father. He intercepted them at the forest edge. There was a struggle. The man fled. Aramide fell and struck her head on the rocks. They said it was an accident. But I knew. I knew I had caused it. A murmur passed through the circle. The elders stared at one another, the younger generation watching with eyes wide in disbelief. I kept the land, Temi went on. I took her place as matriarch. They buried her without question. No rituals. No honor. I said nothing. And I built my name on her silence. The spirit raised Abony's arm again, and her voice came low, trembling with rage. You buried her like a dog. You left her spirit to wander, unheard, uncalled. The drum beat, year after year, and she waited. And now she has answered. Temi sobbed. Her hands clutched the earth like it could swallow her whole. I have carried the guilt all my life. But I was afraid. If I told the truth, they would strip everything. My children would suffer. I tried to honor her in secret. I poured libations. I whispered her name in the wind. That is not enough, the spirit answered. A soul denied its place cannot rest. Her name was erased from the family shrine. Her spirit is trapped. Abony's body twisted slightly, her head tilted to the stars as though listening. She is near. Then. A gust of wind whipped through the circle, sudden and cold, snapping flames sideways. The villagers cried out and covered their faces. The drums stopped again. Abony's head jerked down. And she pointed toward the grove behind the fire, the place where the firstborns of the lineage were buried. Go there, she said. Dig beneath the fig tree. Bring her bones. The truth must be unearthed. The priestess, Mama Aina, stepped forward. Her staff tapped the earth once, and the circle parted. She looked to Temi. You will go, she said firmly. You will bring her out with your own hands. Temi nodded, unable to speak. Two young men stepped beside her, helping her rise. Together, they moved toward the dark grove, torches in hand. The crowd followed in silence, the fire left behind still dancing in the wind. The fig tree stood crooked and tall, its roots thick like old fingers clawing into the soil. Beneath it, the earth was soft, almost as if waiting. The men began to dig with their hands, with sticks, anything they could find. The wind howled louder. Above, the moon disappeared behind a heavy cloud. Then, one of the men let out a shout. His fingers had brushed something hard. A moment later, they pulled a small, shallow box from the earth, old, rotted, held together by twine and time. When they opened it, the bones inside were wrapped in a faded cloth, one that had once been bright with tribal colors but was now brown and gray with age. A carved pendant lay atop the remains, a hunter's symbol from the forbidden tribe. Temi collapsed beside the box, weeping without sound. Her fingers reached for the pendant. Then recoiled as if it burned her. She looked at Mama Aina, then back at the grove. Forgive me, she whispered to the bones. Aramide, sister. I stole your name. I buried your truth. Let the spirits hear my repentance. Mama Aina nodded solemnly. We will perform the rites tonight. Her soul will be given its place. And you, Temi, will relinquish the title of matriarch. Her line must be restored. Temi didn't protest. Her strength had vanished, like smoke in the trees. The villagers carried the box back to the circle. Abony still stood in the same spot, unmoving. Eyes burning like hot coals. When the bones were placed before the fire, her voice spoke once more. You have done what was long overdue. Her name will be restored. But the curse has left its mark. The family must fast. The drums must rest. And for 3 cycles of the moon, no lie must pass your lips. Mama Aina struck her staff against the ground. It will be done. A moment passed. Then another. Abony's body began to shudder, gently at first, then violently, as if whatever had held her was releasing its grip. She cried out once, then collapsed into the arms of a nearby dancer. The flames dimmed. The wind died. And the night, finally, exhaled. The sacred drum night was over. But in its silence, a forgotten soul had finally found its voice. The sun had not yet risen. But the sky held the faintest hue of blue, the kind that comes just before dawn remembers her duty. The fire in the center of the village had died down to glowing embers. Crackling softly in the hush that had replaced the night's storm of revelations. The people of Abulumo had not returned to their homes. They remained, seated, standing. Kneeling, quiet as the dust settled around the truth they had witnessed. Abony lay in a cot beneath a woven canopy beside the circle. Her skin was cool, her breath shallow but steady. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering prayers with a voice still broken by what she had seen. The girl had danced with grace, then fire, then become something beyond recognition. And now she looked like a child emptied of all memory, as if the spirit had taken more than just control, it had taken a part of her soul as payment. Mama Aina had begun preparing the rites before the sacred drum could be silenced. The priests and women of the shrine gathered dried herbs, sacred white cloth, and ancestral oils. A space was cleared beneath the great Irako tree at the edge of the village, where the spirits were known to gather at the turn of dawn. There, the bones of Aramide would be washed, blessed, and buried with the full honor of her name, her bloodline, and her unspoken pain. Temi moved slowly through the motions, each step heavier than the last. Her face was aged anew overnight. Creased not with time, but with the weight of long-held guilt finally unchained. She carried the cloth-wrapped remains herself, her hands trembling but determined. Her daughters did not stop her. They watched in silence, unsure how to feel, grief and shame tangled too closely to be separated. When they reached the Irako tree, the drums were silent by command. Only the wind was permitted to speak. Mama Aina stood before the gathering, her staff marked with palm fronds, her face streaked with the white chalk of the ancestors. Today, she said, we restore what was taken. The villagers encircled the grove, shoulders touching, breath held. Mama Aina knelt beside the shallow grave and began the incantations in a voice low and rhythmic. Older than any remembered language. Her hands moved in sacred gestures, tracing symbols in the air. The incense rose in curls, and the wind seemed to shift, responding. Swirling through the canopy like a whisper of welcome. When the name Aramide was spoken aloud for the first time in nearly 40 years, a shiver moved through the crowd. Some wept. Others lowered their heads. For a moment it was as if the earth itself sighed beneath their feet. Temi stepped forward last, kneeling beside the grave. She reached into her robe and pulled out the family pendant, the one she had worn as matriarch, passed down for generations. Her hands clutched it one final time before she placed it on top of the bones, tears falling silently onto the sacred cloth. Forgive me, she said. Take your place again. I do not deserve mine. As the earth was gently poured over Eremide's remains, the first light of dawn broke through the trees. A golden beam struck the center of the grave, bathing it in warm light. The people gasped softly. A quiet rustle passed through the branches, though no wind blew. Mama Aina raised her hands in reverence. "She is at peace," she said. "The spirits have accepted her return." And then, far behind them, from the direction of the village, a sound broke the silence. A drumbeat. Not a loud one, not from the ritual drums that still sat untouched near the fire, but a single, soft, measured beat. Like a heartbeat. Everyone turned. Ebony stood there, barefoot, dressed in white, her face clean but distant. Her hands held a small hand drum, the kind children used to play with, carved by her late grandfather. She was tapping it gently, her eyes unfocused, as if still somewhere between the worlds. Mama Aina walked toward her slowly. "Ebony," she called gently. The girl stopped drumming, then looked up. Her voice was faint, but clear. She said, "Thank you." "Who?" the priestess asked. "My aunt," Ebony answered. She said, "She's with the river now. With the women who sing beneath the water. She said she's watching the house her father built, and she's not angry anymore." Mama Aina bowed her head. "Then the veil has closed. The work is done." But Ebony didn't move. She stood very still for a moment, then said something strange. She also said, "The story isn't finished." The priestess stiffened. "What do you mean?" Ebony looked away. She said someone else knew. Not just Temi. A man, one of the elders. He helped cover it. He made the lie stick. And his blood still sits on the council. Gasps rose from the villagers. Faces turned to one another, suspicion blooming like fire in dry grass. The peace of dawn was already slipping. Mama Aina raised her hands to calm them. "The spirits will reveal what they will. But not today. Today, we bury. We honor. We rest. The council will meet before the next moon. Let no one act without ceremony." But the words Ebony had spoken had already sown unease into the hearts of the people. Though the burial had been done, the revelation had cracked more than just one lie. In the days that followed, the village would change. Questions would rise. Old men would be eyed with fresh suspicion. New names would surface, some with shame, some with truth. The sacred drums would remain silent for many nights, as the elders debated, confessed, and argued in secret chambers. Ebony, though returned to herself, was no longer a normal girl. She could not sleep in her mother's hut anymore. She was moved to the edge of the village, near the shrine, under the watch of Mama Aina. The spirits had marked her, and such a mark could not be undone. Some feared her. Others brought gifts. A few whispered that she might become the next priestess. Ebony herself said little. She spoke when the wind whispered first. She moved when the drums in her dreams told her to. She had become the thread between the living and the dead, and the spirits were not yet done with her. Because the sacred drum night was not just a night. It was a doorway. And once opened, some doors never truly close. The days that followed the sacred drum night were unlike any Abulumo had seen in decades. Though the sun rose and set, though the goats bleated and the yam fields called for tending, a tension hung over the village like a net of unseen wires, stretched and waiting to snap. People walked softer. They spoke in lower tones. The children no longer played near the sacred grove. And each night, a different house left offerings at the edge of the forest, bowls of palm oil, kola nuts, dried fish, and water, hoping to appease spirits they could no longer ignore. But it was not only spirits the village feared now. It was the past. The elders called a private council on the third day after Eremide's burial. Held in the meeting hut at the heart of the village, beneath a thatched roof supported by 12 wooden pillars carved with the symbols of lineage and law, the council gathered not to debate as usual, but to reckon. Mama Aina sat among them, not as a voting member, but as spiritual witness. Abani was not allowed inside. She waited outside in silence, seated beneath the shadow of an old mango tree. Her back straight, her eyes closed, as if listening to drums no one else could hear. Inside, the air was thick with heat and unsaid words. Temi sat alone on one side of the circle. The others, 11 men, all elders of long-standing families, sat on mats of woven reed, eyes fixed on the center fire. They had listened to her confession. They had heard the truth. But now Abani's final words on the night of the possession weighed heavier than the shame already revealed. She said someone else knew, Temi repeated. A man. One of you. You helped seal her fate. The accusation floated between them like smoke. Elder Boyega, the eldest of them all, cleared his throat. No man among us has yet admitted such knowledge. But if it is true, we must uncover it. The spirits have spoken. Silence is no longer a shield. Temi looked around the circle, her eyes burning with the kind of fury only an old woman betrayed by time could know. I kept my sin for decades. But the spirit would not sleep. If I can speak, so can he. Several of the men looked away. One wiped sweat from his brow, though the air was not hot. Another shifted uncomfortably, muttering a silent prayer. Then Elder Alyamide spoke. He had once been a handsome man with a voice that carried over crowds. Now, age had softened him. But his presence still demanded attention. He leaned forward and placed his hands on his knees. There was a time, he said slowly, when I knew something was not as it seemed. I was just a junior in the council then. I had no authority, no power to question the elders before me. But I remember the day Aramide died. I remember her father arriving at the council. Shaking with grief, saying she had shamed the family, saying she had tried to run. He told us not to ask questions, to preserve her dignity by silence. Temi's eyes narrowed. And you obeyed. Alyamide nodded, shame creeping into his face. I did. I obeyed because that was what we were taught, to protect the family name above all. We buried her quietly. We removed her from the shrine rolls. We said it was for peace. But I knew. I knew something wasn't right. Another elder, Adwol, sat up. But you said nothing. What would I have said? Alyamide's voice cracked. That our most respected elder had killed his own daughter. That the matriarch title had passed by treachery. I was a young man with no voice. And later, it felt too late. Too dangerous. The silence had already grown roots. Mama Aina stirred, finally speaking. And yet you sat through every sacred drum night after that. Heard the drums. Saw the dancers. Felt the spirits restless. And still, said nothing. I prayed, Alyamide said, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. Temi stood. Her voice rose, shaking but strong. You were not just a silent witness. You helped erase her. You sat by while I was honored. You accepted every offering. Every word of praise. You let her spirit rot under that tree while you clapped for me. No more, Mama Aina said, rising to her feet. Her staff struck the ground. The spirits are not interested in speeches. The girl is gone. But the wound remains. What has been confessed must be cleansed. Alyamide lowered his head. What must I do? You will step down from the council, Mama Aina said. You will perform the ritual of ash. You will serve her shrine for 7 moons. And when the next sacred drum night arrives, you will carry her name on your back. Some elders murmured. It was a harsh sentence, more than symbolic. Serving a shrine was labor, fasting, humiliation. Carrying the name of the betrayed meant admitting guilt in every village ceremony for a full year. But no one protested. They had seen what the spirits could do. And no one wanted the drums to call out their own secrets next. Outside, Ebony opened her eyes slowly as the meeting hut fell silent. She looked at the dust in the wind and nodded once. She had not heard the words inside, but she knew. The drum within her chest, the one the spirits had awakened, had calmed. That night, the fire in the center of the village was not lit. There were no stories told, no songs sung. But at the edge of the sacred grove, a small lantern glowed beside the newly restored grave. Temi sat there in silence, dressed in mourning cloth, her head shaved. Behind her, her daughters gathered branches to build the new shrine for Aramide, one that would stand with the others. Not hidden but honored. Ebony stood nearby, watching, her white robe brushing the earth. A small girl approached her, no older than 6, holding a carved figure in her hands. "Is she your ancestor now?" the girl asked softly. Ebony smiled, the first time in days. "She is all of ours." The girl handed her the figure. "My grandmother said the dead only stay angry when we forget their names." She was right, Ebony said, accepting the gift. "That's why we drum. That's why we dance. So they never have to be forgotten again." The wind stirred. Somewhere deep in the forest, a single drumbeat echoed, faint and distant. And this time, Ebony didn't tremble. She simply listened. Weeks passed, and the village of Abulumo, once burdened by unspoken history, now moved with a strange new energy. It was not quite joy, not quite sorrow, it was something deeper. A slow transformation, like a wound healing under the skin. The people had seen the veil lifted, had heard the voice of the forgotten, and they could not return to the old ways. To silence and secrecy. The very soil had spoken, and the drums had become more than sound, they were memory, they were truth, and they were warning. Ebony had changed too. She still walked with grace, still wore her beads and simple cloth, but the way others looked at her was different. Children watched her as if waiting for her eyes to glow again. Elders spoke to her with cautious reverence. The drummers bowed their heads when she passed. Some nights, people claimed to see her standing by the riverbank, speaking to the water. Her face lit with the faint glow of moonlight even on nights the moon did not shine. But Ebony herself felt something deeper still, a quiet, pulsing rhythm beneath her skin. As if her soul had been braided with something older than time. She dreamed of fire and footsteps, of shadowy figures in forests, of drums that played in places no one could name. She did not always understand the dreams, but she knew they were not hers alone. One afternoon, Mama Aina summoned her to the shrine. The priestess was seated by the sacred fire. Her bones wrapped in the patterned cloth of her lineage, her hair dusted with grey ash, her hands busy grinding herbs in a wooden bowl. "Sit, child," she said without looking up. Ebony obeyed. "There is another sacred drum night coming," Mama Aina said. "Sooner than usual." Ebony blinked. "But we just had one." "That was for the ancestors," the priestess said. "This one is for the living. The drums say it is needed." Ebony said nothing. The fire cracked between them. "There is sickness in the village. Not of the body, but of the spirit. Since Aramide's truth came out, others have started dreaming. The land speaks more loudly now. Secrets are bubbling up from places long sealed." Ebony nodded. She had felt it too. The air in Abulumo had become charged, like lightning before a storm. "You will dance again," Mama Aina said. "But not alone." Ebony's breath caught. "Who?" "The one who carries the mark of the lie," she replied. "Elder Alyamide's grandson, Olealu." Ebony frowned. She knew the boy. He was quiet, strong, respectful. but had always kept his distance from village rites, preferring solitude in the forests with his bow and his silence. "He doesn't dance," she said. "No," Mama Aina agreed. "Which is why he must." Abony tilted her head. "What is he hiding?" Mama Aina gave her a look that said, "Not hiding, carrying." Then she leaned forward, her voice low. "The spirit that took you, it did not come only for Aramide. It came because the land is stained with many secrets." Her story was only the first drumbeat. The girl's heart thudded. She remembered what the spirit had said. "The story isn't finished." "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow night," said the priestess. "The moon will be full again. And the drums are restless." The next evening, the sky burned with crimson as the sun bled into the trees. Once again, the village gathered. There was no feast this time, no celebration. Only anticipation. The sacred drum circle was rebuilt, fresh firewood stacked, the dust cleared, the stones blessed. The drummers arrived silently, their eyes deeper than before, their hands steady but tense. Abony stood in white again, the sacred markings painted across her face, but this time, another stood beside her. Oleolu, tall, broad-shouldered, his eyes flickering with something uncertain. He wore the cloth of the dancers but no bells. He looked at Abony with a question on his lips, but he did not ask it. She only nodded once. They both stepped into the circle. The drums began. The rhythm was different this time, not slow, not fast, but strange, uneven. It pulsed like an erratic heartbeat, like a memory trying to find its form. The dancers moved. Abony surrendered to the rhythm. Her body knew what to do now. She no longer danced the way others did. She let herself be carried. She became the beat. Oleolu moved stiffly at first, uncertain. But as the rhythm grew, something in him responded. His feet began to follow the pattern, then his shoulders, then his hips. It was awkward, raw, but real. The villagers gasped when he spun unexpectedly, his eyes closed, his fists clenched. The drums adjusted to him, like they had been waiting. And then, it happened again. The wind shifted. The fire grew tall. The drums hit a deep note, and both dancers froze. Abony's eyes went wide. Oleolu dropped to his knees. A sound came from his throat, not human, not bestial. But something in between. His hands clawed the earth, and when he lifted his head, his face was no longer his. His mouth opened, and a voice poured out. "I have waited," the voice said. Waited beneath the trees, beneath the lies, beneath the silence. The people drew back. A second possession. In 2 moons. It was unheard of. The voice raged. "You called me a thief. You cut my name from your stories. You made me the villain. But I was only a boy." Mama Aina stepped forward, her staff trembling. "Who speaks?" she demanded. "I am the son of the hunter." The voice replied. "The one Aramide loved. They said he fled. But they caught him. They buried him beneath the same tree." The crowd gasped. Abony felt her chest tighten. The spirit of the unborn. A child never known. A secret never told. Oleolu, possessed now, pointed to the earth. "I never lived. But I remember. Her tears. His blood. The betrayal. I could have been born. But they killed the root before the fruit could fall." The wind howled. The fire scattered sparks like stars. Oleolu rose, shaking, his arms stretched wide. "I have come for my name. I have come for my place." Mama Aina knelt. "You shall have it. What is your name?" The spirit paused. Then answered, "Adigun." Abony stepped forward. "Then Adigun, we welcome you. You are of this village. You are of this blood. The spirit sighed. Then I rest. Oleolu collapsed into Abony's arms. The fire dimmed. And the drums stopped. For the second time in one season. A soul had been claimed and given voice. But this time, the soul was not of the past. It was of the almost born, the could have been, the story that never had the chance to breathe. That night, a new shrine was built. A small stone placed beside Eremide's. A symbol of unity, of memory, of peace. And as the village slept, Abony stood alone beneath the stars. Not praying. Not afraid. Just listening. Because she knew, some stories sleep. But others? They wait. The winds of the harmattan arrived early that year, sweeping through Abalumo with dry breath and ghostly fingers. The leaves on the ancient trees turned brittle and pale, the air thick with red dust that coated rooftops, shrines, and skin alike. Yet the village didn't complain. They accepted it as a sign, not of punishment, but of change. The spirits had spoken. Twice. The veil had been lifted. And the earth itself seemed to move beneath their feet as if waking from a long slumber. Abony felt it more than anyone. Since the night of Oleolu's possession. She had ceased to live as a normal girl. She no longer fetched water from the stream or joined the other girls in weaving mats. She spent her days near the sacred grove, often barefoot, often silent. Her eyes fixed on things others could not see. Sometimes she murmured in her sleep, other times she woke with markings on her arms that no hands had painted. Mama Aina watched her closely but interfered little. She knew what was happening. The spirit that had passed through Abony hadn't left completely. It lingered, not in malice, but in purpose. Abony had become what the elders whispered of in half-forgotten tales, a mouth of the veil, one who hears the ancestors when they choose to speak, and speaks for them when they demand to be heard. But not everyone was ready to listen. Whispers had begun to rise like smoke from quiet fires. Some villagers said too much spirit talk was dangerous. That the rituals were no longer controlled. That the drums were being awakened too often. Some feared another possession. Others feared Abony herself. One night, as Abony sat beneath the Irako tree, now surrounded by two small shrines. One for Eremide, one for Adigun, she heard footsteps behind her. Slow. Hesitant. It was Elder Aidwol. He cleared his throat before speaking. Child. May I sit? Abony nodded without turning. The old man settled beside her, placing his walking staff in the grass. For a long moment, they said nothing. Only the cricket spoke. You know, he began. I've lived long enough to see many sacred drum nights. Some were peaceful. Some brought messages. Some brought warnings. But none shook this village like the ones you've danced in. She remained silent. He sighed. Some believe you are a blessing. Others think you are a storm. Do you? She asked quietly. I think you are a mirror, he said. You make people see what they buried. And not everyone wants to remember. She turned to look at him then. Her eyes were not angry, only old, too old for a girl her age. They buried more than Eremide. There are still names without stones. Spirits without songs. I know, he said. Abony reached into the fold of her robe and pulled out a small, worn book. It was bound with leather and tied with a faded cord. She handed it to him. I found this beneath the shrine, she said. It was hers. Whose? Eremide. Aidwol took it with trembling hands. Inside, he found pressed leaves, faded drawings, and words written in delicate, swirling script. Lines of poetry. Dreams. Lists of herbs. And at the very back, names. Names of women. Women not on the shrine walls. Some he recognized. Some he did not. She was writing a memory, Abony said. Of all the women the elders refused to honor. The outcasts. The disobedient. The forgotten. Adewole blinked back tears. And now? She wants them remembered. He looked up at the sky. How? The drums, she said. Again. One last time. That same week. Mama Aina called for a gathering of names. It was not a sacred drum night, not a festival, not a funeral. It was something new. Something reborn. The villagers were told to bring offerings not to their ancestors, but to those who had none. Every house came with names on parchment, on cloth, carved into calabashes or sung into the air. Women who had died in childbirth but were never spoken of again. Girls who had disappeared. Widows who had been cast out. The incomplete ancestors, as Mama Aina called them. Abony stood at the center of the circle, surrounded not by dancers, but by memory. She did not dance this time. She simply walked. Slowly. With every name spoken. She placed a white pebble into the fire. And the flames responded, not with heat, but with color. Gold. Blue. Violet. Green. It was as if each spirit came forward to touch the air once, then return. The drums played. Not for possession, but for peace. And the villagers wept, not from fear, but from release. As the night deepened, and the last names were spoken, Abony stepped forward and said, "They are no longer forgotten. Let them sleep." Then she turned to Mama Aina and whispered, "The ancestors say, it is time." "Time for what?" the priestess asked. "For you to rest." The old woman's breath caught. Then she smiled, tired and wide. "So they finally speak to you without fire and thunder." Abony nodded. "They say your bones are ready to lie beside your mother's." Mama Aina looked to the stars. "Then I will go when the next moon is full." And she did. She passed quietly, 3 weeks later, in her sleep, with no pain. A new priestess was chosen, not by vote, but by the drummers, who placed the sacred anklets at Abony's feet without a word. She picked them up. And so, the girl who danced with spirits became the one who listened for them. The drums would beat again in Abalumo, but never the same. Because now, when they played, the people listened differently. They no longer feared what walked from the firelight. They no longer buried names beneath lies. And in every rhythm, in every dance, in every whisper beneath the stars, they remembered. The ancestors are never truly gone. They are simply waiting for us to listen. The sun rose soft and golden over Abalumo, casting its first light over rooftops newly thatched, shrines newly cleaned, and hearts newly awakened. The air was no longer thick with silence. It sang with presence. Birds chirped not just for the morning, but as if in celebration of something only they could see. The old order had fallen. Not with a war or revolt, but with rhythm, truth, and the voices of the long departed. Abony stood on the sacred hill at the edge of the village, where the trees parted just enough for her to see the river glinting in the distance. The sacred drums were behind her now, housed in a small earthen temple built for them alone. No hands touched them unless they were washed, oiled, and invited. They were no longer instruments. They were altars. And Abalumo no longer called them for festivals or feasts. They were reserved only for memory and healing. She breathed in deeply. The wind smelled of ashwood and hibiscus. Below, the village moved slowly. Children swept the shrine yard. Elders sat under trees, carving or weaving. The mood was gentle, like the earth after a storm has passed, cleansed but changed forever. It had been 1 full year since the night of Eremide's possession. Since then, 4 more names had been restored. 3 new shrines had been built. Families that had been fractured had begun to mend. And Ebony, once a quiet girl with nimble feet, had become the listener, the one the spirits trusted. She turned as Oleolu approached, carrying a gourd of cool water. He was taller now, his face leaner, more assured. Since that night he had danced and screamed in another's voice, he had trained in silence, walking with the hunters, learning the rhythms of the land. But he always came back to the drum circle, always sat near Ebony, never speaking unless moved by something deep. He handed her the gourd. She drank, wiped her mouth, and nodded. "It's today." He nodded back. "I know. Because today was the day of the final drumbeat. Not final forever, but final for what had been. The ancestors had told her. The wound was closed, the names restored. The drums would sleep now, not in fear or shame, but in peace. Ebony would lead one last ritual. And then the sacred rhythm would rest until the land called again. At dusk, the village gathered without invitation. They knew. Word had spread not through messengers, but through dreams. That morning, many had awoken with images of fire, drums, and dancing ancestors. Some saw Aramide smiling. Some saw Mama Aina walking into the river, her staff turning to flowers. The spirits were saying goodbye, for now. The fire was lit at the center once more. The drums were brought out by children, gently, as if cradling ancestors. Ebony stepped into the circle barefoot. Her robe a deep, earthen red, the color of life, death, and everything in between. Her face bore no paint, only the lines the spirits had traced across her over time. She raised her hands. Silence fell. "This is not a night of possession," she said. "Not a night of confession. This is a night of gratitude. The ancestors have spoken. The door is closed. The land is healed." The drummers began slowly. Not the furious rhythms of revelation, but a soft heartbeat, steady, grounded. Ebony danced, not wildly, but gently, as if walking across water. Around her, others joined, not just trained dancers, but elders, children, mothers, fathers. They moved as one. It was not a performance. It was a prayer. And as they danced, the air shifted. The wind rose. The fire pulsed. The drums grew louder, not by force, but by something unseen. And then, Ebony stopped. She raised her hands once more. The drummers struck one final note. Silence followed. A wind moved through the circle, warm, gentle, full of voices that did not speak in words. Some wept. Some smiled. Everyone felt it. Then, the flames parted. And there she was. Aramide. Just for a moment. Not flesh. Not ghost. Something in between. She stood tall, proud, her face serene. Beside her stood a boy, hand in hers, Adi gun. Behind them, others. Mama Aina. Unnamed women. Ancestors of old, cloaked in shadow and light. They did not speak. They simply bowed. And disappeared. The fire dimmed. The wind stilled. And the people knew, it was done. That night. No one returned home immediately. They sat around the fire, speaking softly, sharing food, stories, laughter. Not because they forgot the pain, but because they had made peace with it. Ebony sat apart, staring into the last glowing ember. Oleolu joined her, saying nothing. The stars blinked overhead. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "We wait," she said. "For what?" "For the next story," she replied. "The next drum. The next voice that needs to be heard." He looked at her. "Do you think they'll call again soon?" She smiled, eyes reflecting starlight. "Not if we remember." Only when we forget do they shout. He nodded. And together, they watched the fire die, not in fear, not in sorrow, but in peace. Because the ancestors had danced. The truth had risen. And the drums had done their work.